Hello, ladies and gentlemen. In the end of January, 4 months into the Israel-Hamas war, an Israeli official report was published accusing more than a dozen employees of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, in allegedly playing a role in the Hamas massacre against Israelis on October 7th, with some actively involved in kidnappings of Israeli civilians as well. Of the 12 UNRWA workers accused, 7 were reportedly teachers, 2 were educational consultants, and others were humanitarian aid warehouse managers. In addition, during the extended meeting last Wednesday between American Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Prime Minister Netanyahu, photos were shown of a huge tunnel that was uncovered under UNRWA's central headquarters in Rimal neighborhood in Gaza. According to the IDF, this was one of the most strategic tunnels of Hamas. The fact is that one of the most strategic tunnels of a murderous terroristic organization was dug under a building allegedly meant to serve the welfare of Palestinians. What exactly is the nature of relations between UNRWA and Hamas? How anti-Semitic UNRWA's educational programs are? And what role do international reactions have on UNRWA? Does Israel need UNRWA in Gaza in the day after the war with Hamas? And which organization can really replace it in case it is dismantled? I'm Adi Kantor, and in order to discuss the catch of UNRWA and its connections to Hamas in depth, I'm honored to have 2 experts next to me in the INSS studio today. Arik Agassi, an expert in the field of global policy and education as COO and head of global partnership at the Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance in School Education, Impact SC. And next to him is Professor Kobi Michael, senior researcher at INSS and a visiting professor at the International Center for Policing and Security, University of South Wales, UK. A warm welcome to the both of you. Kobi and Arik, thank you very much for joining me today. Kobi, I think it would be wise to start with you. Maybe you can give us more the framework, the background about UNRWA. What is UNRWA? What is the characteristics of this organization before we even dive into Hamas connections? What are we talking about here?
We are talking about an organization that was established in 1949 following the 48 Independence War, and actually it was forced on the UN by the Arab world, and the initial intention was to have a sort of a UN agency that will deal with the settling, the rehabilitation of the Palestinian refugees that ran from Palestine, to the hosting Arab countries here in the region. The idea was similar in a sense to another unique agency that was established for the Korean refugees that ran from North Korea to South Korea. The difference is that the agency for the Korean refugees was a real agency for rehabilitating the refugees, and it succeeded in rehabilitating them, and after 3 years it was closed. In contrary to the Korean refugee agency, the Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRWA, exists till today for 74 years, and the number of the Palestinian refugees just increased dramatically, and an organization that began with 750,000 Palestinian refugees is responsible today for almost 6 million, or even a bit above 6 million. And if in the first decade to the existence of this organization, part of its mandate was the idea of resettling or rehabilitation of the Palestinian refugees in the Arab countries, so after less than a decade, this part of the mandate actually was erased, once again because of the pressure that from the Arab world due to political reasons, and eventually there is no even a single Palestinian refugee that was rehabilitated or resettled by this agency. Along the years, UNRWA eventually acted or operated in 6 major arenas: the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. Unfortunately, even after the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, that I would like to remind our viewers that at least until 2007, the Palestinian Authority controlled both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. UNRWA continued and even elaborated and expanded its services to the Palestinians, although there is a functioning, or there was supposed to be a functioning Palestinian Authority that has the responsibility to take care and to deal with all of its citizens without any distinction between refugees or non-refugees, okay? And talking about refugees, we are talking now about the 5th generation of refugees. Actually, these are not refugees according to any terminology or typology or definition that exists. But the status of a refugee with regard to the Palestinians is a sort of an automatic status which is given to a person that was born to a mother or to a father that they themselves, okay, were born to refugees. But if we are talking about the original populace of the refugees from 1948, we will remain with some dozens of thousands of original refugees. All the others are not actually refugees. And with the years, we see that UNRWA actually, mainly with regard to the Palestinian territories, be it the Gaza Strip or the West Bank, UNRWA functioned as a state in a state. Actually, UNRWA provides services which are state services like education, healthcare, welfare,
energy, water,
and
infrastructure.
And they deal also with infrastructure, but with regard to humanitarian aid, they don't build, state infrastructure. But it is enough what they do, because all what they do is part of the responsibility that any sovereign power in any territory has vis-a-vis its populace. And the idea that UNRWA actually perpetuates and continue giving or providing these services instead of the Palestinian government, or instead of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, or instead of the Jordanian government in Jordan, although all the three places that I have mentioned, okay, are populated by more than 4 million Palestinian refugees, according to the definition of UNRWA. By the way, the definition of a Palestinian refugee has been changed several times, okay, by the General Assembly, because the Arab world and the Palestinians have an automatic majority there. The mandate of UNRWA is given by the General Assembly, and they have the automatic majority there, and therefore they can decide whatever they want. And the status, yes, and the definitions have been changed, and the mandate has been changed several times according to the political needs. And eventually we are talking about more than 4 million Palestinians in the status of refugees that live in Jordan or in the Palestinian territories, okay? And they hold a Jordanian citizenship and passport, or Palestinian citizenship or passport, but in the very same time, they are considered refugees, okay? This is something which is not less than absurd. And just in order to finalize, I would say that that UNRWA became to be a very convenient political platform for the Arab world for, I would say, the first 4 decades or so, in order to put Israel, as the scapegoat, in order to scapegoat Israel and to divert the attention of their publics at home from the domestic problems by keeping alive the Palestinian refugeehood. And since the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, the beginning of the Oslo process, this is the ultimate platform which is used by the Palestinian Authority and later on Hamas in the Gaza Strip for perpetuating the conflict, for keeping alive the Palestinian ethos, which is based on the Palestinian refugeehood, about the ethos of right of return, and all of these are indoctrinated by UNRWA through its responsibility to the educational system in the Palestinian territory.
Thank you very much. This is exactly the point in which I would like to turn to you, Arik. And you're analyzing textbooks, school books. you're very much aware of what is happening, not only in the Palestinian Authority. Your organization observes also the other countries in the region. But before we dive into the Hamas relations, what is the influence on educational programs in the Palestinian Authority? As Kobi said, there's supposed to be a Palestinian Authority, functioning Palestinian Authority. Why is there even a need for a non-state organization to have so much influence on what young students learn about the world, about the region, about cultures? I know that there's a lot of influence. Maybe you can tell us a bit about how big the influence is. What do we see in textbooks? What have we seen, let's say, until October 7th? And let's talk after this about what evolved since then.
Basic ground rules in terms of what UNRWA teaches, because people not necessarily think they might have a UN curriculum or something like that. Yeah, exactly. The basic rule is that UNRWA chooses to teach what they call the host nation's curriculum. So UNRWA also has schools in Jordan. As Kobi said, they teach the Jordanian curriculum. But in the Palestinian territories, West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, they use and choose to use, nobody enforced it on them, the Palestinian Authority's curriculum that various studies across different NGOs and also governments found antisemitism, incited violence, jihad, even creeping into science and math that we've seen that help enable October 7th. And we've been, as an institution, ringing the bells of the alarm on what is going to happen if these textbooks don't change. Now, to your question, in terms of the power of textbooks, research shows, in particularly the Arab world that are very authoritarian regimes, even more so than the West, the textbook has the seal of the state on it, the flag. It comes from the state. It's not publishers. The Ministry of Education in these countries are the ones who are writing it. It's controlled by the state, by the leader. And if you want to see what the next generation will look like, you're not supposed to...
Look at the leader.
But you look at the textbooks, not what the leader says on his local media channel or the politician. If you really want to understand where a leader is taking his next generation, you need to look at the textbooks. Because imagine in first or second grade, a child doesn't know how to operate a mouse or an iPad or Facebook or TikTok.
Sure he doesn't know?
Not yet. But usually hard copy textbooks are the first means of communication that children are exposed to, either if you're a mother,
books.
Yes, children's books, or in school, and the power of the teacher that also has a teacher guide to accompany the radical stuff in the textbook is a recipe for radicalization and disaster that's been around since the first textbooks came in 2000, which again UNRWA chooses deliberately to use. Nobody forced them to use that. They could have chosen a different curriculum.
Yeah. I would like to know, to ask the both of you, maybe turn on to Kobi, what happened since October 7th? We see it in the media, the connections between Hamas and UNRWA. Was it always like this? Or when did Hamas start to enter more and more this organization and then Arik control the textbooks? You will give the educational angle, and Kobi, maybe you can give us more the relations between these two organizations, terroristic organization and a UN institution.
And actually, in order to understand what happened in October 7th, we have to understand, as you mentioned, what happened before October 7th. Okay, and since Hamas took the entire control over the Gaza Strip, 2007, June 2007, after a coup d'état. Okay, in 2006, after the election, there was a unity government between Fatah and Hamas. It is right that Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas in Gaza those days, was nominated or appointed as the prime minister, but this government didn't function actually. And after a short period of time, there was a coup d'état, and the Hamas took the entire control over the Gaza Strip and became to be the effective ruler, the sovereign of the Gaza Strip. Once Hamas became to be the sovereign of the Gaza Strip, then it began its controlling over the population, the territory, and all the facilities and the activities in the Gaza Strip. Now, Hamas is deeply embedded in the civil society and deeply and supported by the local society. And Hamas, in order to assure its control over the territory, understood that it has to control UNRWA as well. It cannot allow It cannot allow any non-governmental organization or any entity to be untied.
Non-state actors.
Okay,
Yeah.
to be untied in the Gaza Strip. Everything must be under control. This is an authoritarian regime. Okay, and therefore it began with the employees of UNRWA. UNRWA has something like between 12 to 13,000 employees in the Palestinian employees. This is, by the way, another exception which is very unique to UNRWA. It doesn't exist in UNHCR, the other agency of the UN that is responsible to deal with all the refugees in the entire globe. Only the Palestinians have an agency of their own, which is UNRWA, but UNHCR doesn't employ refugees, okay, in its staff. UNRWA does, and UNRWA employs more than 30,000 people.
30,000 in Gaza?
No.
In around, okay.
All around. In Gaza, it's something like 13,000. 12 to 13,000.
Yeah.
But in order to gain control over the organization, first of all, you have to gain control over the workers of the organization. And therefore, all the people that work in Hamas, they work in UNRWA. They work under the permission of Hamas. Now, they, generally speaking, can be divided to three major groups. The first group, which is the most dangerous one, all of them are very dangerous, okay, but the most dangerous one is Hamas activists. And in this regard,
you mean terrorists? You mean
yes,
terrorists that
Hamas,
are in
Hamas people, okay, official people of Hamas, that they have military duty or any other functional or organizational duty in Hamas, and in the very same time, they work in UNRWA. Okay.
Yeah, we saw it, by the way, one of the dozen who were perpetrating the massacre on October 7th were teachers, were educational staff.
I will give you even...
There were terrorists and teachers at the same time.
An extremer example. You know that in 2017, the head of the Union of the Labor of UNRWA in Gaza was Dr. Mustafa al-Hindi. And Dr. Mustafa al-Hindi, in the very same time as the head of the Union Labor, he was a member of the political bureau of Hamas in Gaza. So what do you need more than that, okay? So this is the first category, people who are affiliated officially with Hamas.
We have two heads.
The second group is the group of the relatives of Hamas officials who work in UNRWA. So you probably can understand that if they are relatives of Hamas officials, then they will do what Hamas officials are telling them to do. And the third group are people who are not affiliated with Hamas officially. They are not relatives of Hamas officials, but they were confirmed by Hamas to be employed by UNRWA, and therefore they collaborate.
See eye to eye with
they
the
collaborate
Hamas
with
doctrine.
Hamas, okay? So at the end of the day, all of the workers, or let's say in order to be more cautious, okay, the vast majority of the workers of UNRWA were under Hamas control. Okay,
this is definitely important.
This is the platform that enabled Hamas to gain a very effective control over all the activities of UNRWA, and this is, on the other hand, and in the very same time, a very useful platform in order to use all the facilities of UNRWA for other purposes, be it the schools of UNRWA in order to do the summer camps for the youth, and they don't teach them in these summer camps science, God forbidden. They teach them terrorism,
how to shoot a gun,
and how to slaughter Jews, and how important is to slaughter Jews, and this is done in the schools of UNRWA, okay, during the summer, and they can use also the facilities of UNRWA, be it clinics, schools, or storage houses, in order to build military compounds in these facilities or beneath these facilities, like the example that you mentioned with regard to the main headquarters of Hamas in Rimal neighborhood.
That we just saw a few days ago.
So, yes.
The picture is clear. The picture is clear.
So eventually, at the end of the day, UNRWA is under Hamas control. And by the way, October 7th is not the first example. I would like to remind us all that after Protective Edge operation in summer 2014, Secretary General of those days, Kofi Annan, visited the Gaza Strip and visited UNRWA facilities. And he said that he is deeply sorry about the abuse or the use of UNRWA facilities by Hamas for terrorist purposes.
It was Ban Ki-moon, and they hid a map of all of Palestine when he came into a class. They hid a map
Ban Ki-moon,
with
sorry, yes,
Ban Ki-moon,
Ban Ki-moon.
It was Ban Ki-moon.
Kofi Annan is the beginning of the 2000. Yes, but generally the Secretary General
said it himself.
Okay, visited himself in the Gaza Strip and said in his voice, okay, that the facilities of UNRWA were used by Hamas for military and terrorist purposes. So it is not new. It was even before 2014.
Clear. What do we see in the textbooks, or maybe concerning UNRWA's reaction after October 7th? We understood what the picture was before. When you analyze the textbooks themselves, the educational programs, how do these people react to October 7th? What do they say about the massacre? Do they see it even as a massacre?
We showcased Facebook pages of schools, so not individual teachers who are speaking to their families on social media, but imagine, a school in Washington, D.C. that has their official Facebook page. And we looked at UNRWA schools in the West Bank to see how they officially, as a school event, reacted to October 7th.
What did you find out?
And we found school events in the school courtyard, so not a single class of one radical teacher, but an official event organized by the school with a picture and a video of the principal with kids in the courtyard hailing the Hamas members, calling for jihad, like publicly, open source. It's not intelligence work. It's open for everybody to see, and that also shows you the connection. But in terms of the education, this is very important to make clear. Over 50% of students in Gaza at any given moment are UNRWA students. So UNRWA has the vast majority of schools in Gaza are UN schools, United Nations schools, that the teachers in these schools, their salaries and the education that they give are paid for by the international community. So
but they're actually Hamas.
No, not necessarily, because
the teachers themselves.
Some are, like you said, there's those three categories. But when Hamas took over in 2007, they didn't fire thousands and tens of dozens of thousands of teachers. They didn't have pedagogues on their payroll. They kept the same teachers that were Palestinian Authority teachers and controlled the system and infiltrated there. But what I wanted to say about the textbooks is that if we had 3,000 Hamas terrorists cross into Israel on October 7th, it's statistically speaking very, very possible that at least half of them were graduates of the UNRWA UN school system that immediately after or even during joined the military wing of Hamas and committed acts of terrorism. And like Kobi said, before October 7th, we also showcased a lot of other examples where very senior UNRWA teachers and principals within the UNRWA organization had a dual position in Hamas. And how did this come out? How did we find out about this? It's when they were elected to the political bureau. So for instance, there was the Hamas's former minister of Interior, Said Siam. He was killed in 2009 by the IDF in Kasled. He was an UNRWA school principal for 27 years, and then immediately when he finished this position, somehow he got elected to be the minister of that. So it shows you that while 20 years in UNRWA, he went in the ranks within Hamas to become minister immediately after he was done. He was even arrested by Israel in the 90s while being an UNRWA teacher. And that's just one example. There's many, many others. And these 12 that crossed in are just the tip of the iceberg.
This is clear. What can be done, Kobi? Israel is in the middle of a war against Hamas. Dismantling UNRWA, what does it mean? What are the implications? What is the replacement of UNRWA? Does Israel need UNRWA on the day after the war, or
first of all,
we're looking for a different somewhere else?
First of all, dismantling UNRWA, it's a moral clarity. Okay, it should be clear and understood that UNRWA was born in sin and UNRWA operated in scene, and UNRWA is a partner to a very big historical scene, okay? These are the facts, and they cannot be denied. And therefore, there is a need for moral clarity. And the moral clarity is that UNRWA should not exist anymore. What will be there in the Gaza Strip, okay? This is something else that should be discussed, but it has no connection to UNRWA. Okay?
But concerning the Israeli interest,
the Israeli interest,
Israel cannot
the Israeli interest,
take care of all the students in the Gaza Strip. We need some kind of entity that will take care of it.
Okay, but
so now the question is, who will be?
The Israeli interest is, first of all, to have a moral clarity, as well as we demand from the entire world to declare and to acknowledge that what has done in October 7th, okay, the murderous massacre, is something that cannot be tolerated, that it is immoral, that it is a Nazi act. Okay?
The incitement also, the denial, Holocaust denial. There's
We
so
demand
much,
the moral clarity in this regard. We have to demand the moral clarity in this regard as well. Without a moral clarity, there will be no strategic clarity.
You don't see any other option than dismantling UNRWA.
No,
you don't see, for example, replacing all teachers.
Look,
UNRWA should not exist concerning your views.
We have published here at the INSS 4 years ago a very detailed research. It was done by me and my colleague Dr. Michal Hatuel, and we thought that even 4 years ago that UNRWA should be dismantled. But understanding that this is not an option, okay, because in order to dismantle UNRWA,
you need a replacement.
You have, first of all, to change to have a resolution in the General Assembly, and we knew that we are not able to do that, or to convince the donors, okay, to stop donating money to UNRWA, and this was an impossible mission as well. So we wrote a very detailed research about the required reforms that should be held with regard to UNRWA, understanding that dismantling UNRWA is not an option. Okay, so how we can reform the organization.
But now in the war, the situation changed.
But now the situation has been changed, and even dramatically. There is the world before October 7th and the world after October 7th, and therefore I think that we don't have to talk about reforms. I don't think that such an organization can be reformed. I don't believe in the UN, which is a dysfunctional, corrupted organization. This is an agency of the UN, okay? So I have no expectations, not from the current Secretary General of the UN and not from the UN generally speaking. And therefore, as long as this entity, this organization will remain on spot, all the Palestinian ethos with regard to refugeehood will remain on spot. It means the perpetuation of the conflict, okay? It means that there is no any horizon to the...
This means another massacre, another October 7th.
And there will be no real reforms, okay? There will be no... Who is going to do the reforms there? Who exactly is going to do the reforms?
No, your view is very clear.
So we can speak about alternatives.
Arik,
we've been discussing
view.
this.
Do you see an alternative to UNRWA?
There are alternatives, and alternatives that are immediate and not in 5-10 years where we're speaking about a day after. And people, everybody likes to say what not to do, but you have to offer a solution. On tomorrow morning, UNRWA will not disappear, but the groundwork can be done now to laying the foundations of a replacement to UNRWA.
How?
And what does this mean? There are in other crises in the world, Kobi doesn't like the UN, but right now I don't see any other alternative if the other Sunni major countries, Saudi or UAE, come in the next day. The UN, if there is a situation, let's say, I don't know, in Uganda, a disaster where you have 30,000 people who lost their homes or 1 million plus with an earthquake or something like that, what happens? Who deals with schools? Who educates the kids? Who gives shelter to these people? So the UN has a thing called a cluster system where different UN bodies, each has its own expertise. UNICEF does education. With its own problems, it has problems, but that's what UNICEF did in Syria. When Syrian kids their school was demolished, UNICEF came in and started educating kids with supplementary material developed by the UN, not Syrian radical textbooks. UNDP, the development agency, OCHA, which did the coordination, UNHCR, which gives shelter. Now, this means that literally thousands of staffers, UN staffers, can come in either to replace or train and give an immediate solution really within weeks, as would happen in a crisis scenario that happens tomorrow, like happened now during the war. And one more thing that people are not aware of. UNRWA is not equipped to give humanitarian aid. They're a state. They do education, they do health, they do social services. Most of these 13,000 staffers in Gaza, most of them are teachers or doctors. They themselves have left their homes in northern Gaza. They themselves are in shelter. They're not waking up, going to work in the morning and distributing aid. The amount of people who is in...
They themselves need the aid.
Yes. So I'm saying the amount of staffers in UNRWA today in Gaza is actually doing distribution of aid. One, they're controlled by Hamas because they're not armed. So if they don't want all these civilians grabbing the aid, they're dependent on Hamas to say it. But secondly, they don't have the expertise. UNRWA asked the IDF to close Kerem Shalom crossing on Saturdays because they could not cope with the amount of aid coming in because they didn't have enough staff or didn't have the knowledge how to do it. More so, they asked the IDF, and I've spoken to Kogat about this, the government coordinator in the territories, they asked Kogat to help them find someone to hire a forklift manager because they didn't even know how to find someone to, manage a forklift. They're not equipped for this mission.
And at the same time, they have Hamas terrorists taking over the trucks as well.
Exactly.
That's a major challenge.
But which means is that if the international community wants to do good for the civilians of Gaza who are in need, UNRWA right now, even within the aid distribution, I'm not talking about the education, is not doing the best job. Other organizations who know how to do this, UNRWA doesn't, can do that tomorrow and the next day. And in terms of education, there are other models. So in Yemen, there is a conflict with the Houthis and the Yemeni government, and there's a lot of refugees who were displaced. There are NGOs on the ground there, also recommended by Carnegie Institute, who are developing a depoliticized UN curriculum, mostly science and math and core subjects, which the parents there are very happy to have their kids graduate from a UN system and have their graduate, go to European universities. And even UNRWA's own former legal advisor advised UNRWA to say, hey, use your donor nations money. Not every single line of the pages in the textbooks are problematic, but the ones that are, replace the hate. You can reshuffle the PDF, the digital edition. And they don't want to do it. And
so you have a problem. You have
exactly.
So that doesn't want to cooperate.
There are alternatives to education. They do not want to do it, and they do not want to change.
I think that we have to be with our foot on the ground and to remember that there is a double standard with regard to the UN.
There is,
and the UN approach to the Yemens and to other populations in the world is not like the UN approach to Israel. And you mentioned OCHA, okay? The last organization or entity that I want to be involved in such a project is OCHA, which is so biased against Israel. And the UN basically is biased against Israel. Okay, and if the manager of UNRWA just 2 days ago said that he still waits to evidence that will be provided by Israel with regard to the involvement of UNRWA, okay, in the atrocities, or he says that UNRWA staff left the headquarters in October 12th. So we have no idea about any connection between what is on the ground and what is beneath the ground, as if all of this infrastructure, okay, of Hamas was built during the war, okay, without any knowledge of any UNRWA employee. This is UNRWA. This is the UN. They don't have to be part of that.
Is there, by the way, any influence of the international community to put pressure on UNRWA to change their staff, to change their curricula? It's not just Israel whose interest is to change what's happening concerning education. I'm sure that there's also an international community that's an actor here.
Of course, and that's why we saw all the freezing of funds only now. Unfortunately, we've been speaking about this, that you can, kill every last military wing Hamas member. If you don't deal with the textbooks, you'll get another version of Hamas in the next generation.
And I think this is something that some of the countries understand.
Now, after years, they're starting to understand. And
for
the first time, the U.S. State Department announced that in the future, without giving a time frame, they will stop aid to UNRWA permanently and will redirect the aid to other UN agencies that will do it in the ground. Now, maybe the aid will come back tomorrow because, UNRWA will not disappear like that. But at least we feel, and I've seen this just based on following, statements by governments, that they understand that UNRWA is part of the problem, not part of the solution. And therefore, on the longer term, I'm talking about probably, between 6 months, a year, 2 years, the funding will keep dropping and dropping and dropping, until the General Assembly will have to decide on what's going on.
But the UN remains.
But here I would like to emphasize and to say that Israel plays a very significant role in this regard. Israel played in the past a very significant role in this regard. I think that it was a negative role, okay, because Israel preserved UNRWA. I can understand why, okay, because it needed UNRWA as a point of contact. contact. But Israel contributed to the survival of UNRWA, and Israel now has a very significant role. And if Israel will not be determined enough, and if Israel will not release intelligence materials that it has, then we might find ourselves with another version of UNRWA that will not be much better than the.
Even though, by the way, I'm sure that what has been published until now is convincing enough about the relations between UNRWA and Hamas. Arik and Kobi, thank you very much for enlightening us on this very troubling issue. Thank you, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot
in this program. See you next time.